Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second talk of the series of Artex Talk 6th edition. My name is Aude Christemba, and I am invited curator at Artex Lagos 2021. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce our three panelists to this conversation titled The Danger of a Single Story. Before moving to the reading of the bio, I would like to express my gratitude to each of them for accepting our invitation and for making some time from their quite busy agendas. So today we are joined by Nengi Omuku, Buhlebezwe Siwani, and Ayọ Akínwándé, who will be moderating the conversation. Nengi Omuku is a visual artist who lives and works in Lagos. She completed both her BA and MA at the Slade School of Fine Arts, University College London. She has had solo shows in Lagos, London, Berlin, and New York, and institutional shows at the La Galerie Centre d'Art Contemporain in Paris and the Shillong Museum in Lagos. Omuku's work can be found in international private and public collections such as the HSBC Art Collection, Berthwreden de Woody Collection, and Down Art Collection. Buhlebezwe Siwani lives and works between Amsterdam and Cape Town. She was raised in Johannesburg. Due to the nomadic nature of her upbringing, she has always lived in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. Siwani completed her BFA Honors at the Wit School of Art in Johannesburg in 2011 and her MFA at the Michaelis School of Fine Art in 2015. Siwani works predominantly in the medium of performance installation. She includes photographic still and video of some performances. She uses the video and the still as a stand-in for her body, which is physically absent from the space. She has exhibited at the Michaelis Galleries in Cape Town, a site-specific exhibition in collaboration with Apixart, New York City, and Stevenson in Cape Town. She's represented in multiple private collections and institutional collections around the world. Ayọ Akínwándé is an interdisciplinary artist, architect, curator, thinker, and writer based between UK and Nigeria. Working across lens-based media installation, sound, and performance, his practice deals with topics that intersect with the notion of people, politics, and power. He's interested in the flow of information in global democratic discourses and how it reflects existing power structures. Ayọ Akínwándé co-curated the 2017 inaugural Lagos Biennale. He was a participating artist in the second Shanghai International Photography and Video Biennale. In 2019, he presented solo exhibition in Nigeria, Scotland, and Cuba for the 13th Biennale of La Habana. And in 2021, he presented solo exhibition in Switzerland and Germany. He is a recipient of the 2021 Chris Claus Seed Award. He received the 2022 Edith Rosehouse Media Art Award, and a solo exhibition of his work will be presented in the Oldenburg Pulverturm in September 2022. Before giving over to Ayọ, I would like to communicate to the people joining us through Zoom that there will be a 15-minute Q&A session. Your questions have to be sent through the chat, and please precise to who you are addressing the question. Thank you. Over to you, Ayọ.
Thank you, Aude. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for the invitation, and thanks to my panelists, Buhlebezwe and Nengi. Since Chimamanda Adichie gave the lecture in 2009, a lot has happened. Africa can no longer be said to be a country. We have online platforms and print publications dedicated to that task. And for those who didn't know how to write about Africa, the late Kenyan writer, Binyavanga Wainaina, gifted them his famous text, How to Write About Africa. So it's time for us Africans to get off the colonial standard. It's time for us to start pegging our contemporary realities to our diverse and oftentimes solitary experiences of sharing a continent of having different voices, of being distant relatives, and also nearby strangers. So today I welcome you all to this space with two amazing contemporary artists, Buhlebezwe Siwani and Nengi Omuku, whose works have been an addition to what I call an Afropedia, an archive that others before us have also contributed to us. So now we start. Nengi, Buhlebezwe, thank you guys for joining.
Thank you, Ayọ.
And can I see Buhlebezwe, are you there?
I'm here.
Yeah, it's good to have you both. And thanks for accepting to be part of this conversation. And yeah, I'm going to leave the floor open to you just so I have like a quick, like, sort of like a preview, like an introduction of your work so that the audience can be familiar with what we're going to be talking about. So they need some visual to do that. And I'm going to now, we're going to start with Nengi. So it's like a brief introduction of your practice. And then after that, Buhle is going to take it over from there. So I leave the floor open to you, Nengi. And
well, thank you for moderating, Ayọ and Buhlebezwe. It's amazing to be in conversation with you and your work. So I will just speak very briefly about what I've been doing for the past 10 years. So after I moved back from England to Nigeria, I intentionally moved back to Nigeria because I wanted to re-engage with the society and sort of like relearn things that I had been missing out on when I was studying. And I decided that my engagement was going to be with fabric because I was really fascinated by how we dressed in Nigeria and how whatever we wore was representative of where we were from. And we wore it with a sense of pride. So I spent the past, about 10 years sort of investigating in each part that I lived in, whether I was in Port Harcourt, Lagos, Abuja, trying to ask the older people, so what is your relationship with textile? Where does it come from? How far back can you open your trunk boxes so that I can see the ancient fabrics that you wore perhaps when you were a child? And that's how I started to understand what was handed down through colonialism and became part of the fabric. There's a lot of that in River State, especially. We have even some old blankets that were worn by people that are now part of our traditional clothes. And then when I lived in Lagos, I asked about Ashoke, and over the years, I've been trying to find like the first version in a way of Ashoke. And well, I don't know if this is the first version, but what I did come across was Sonyo. That's the name of this. It's a pre-colonial textile. It predates the whole concept of Nigeria. And it's a fabric that was worn with so much pride at that time, but it's no longer worn because we import a lot of clothes from China and everywhere. So I decided to like buy them from the local markets and repurpose them and display them in a way that the viewer can engage with the totality of the material. So you're looking at a painting that's talking about the history of, about living in Nigeria and in a way about the history of Nigeria and my relationship with archival images, as well as looking, at the back and understanding how the weaving was done and questioning where the weaving comes from. So that's a summary of my practice.
Thank you, Nengi, for that brief introduction. We're going to touch on a lot of the things you've mentioned in the course of our conversation this hour. So I'm going to pass the floor to Buhlebezwe.
And my story starts from a very personal point. So I started making work about the Black female body in relation to spirituality in a context where a lot of my experience in sub-Saharan Africa has been that our parents go to church, and that they are opposed to the body, the Black body going back to their own kind of practicing their own spirituality. So I began, when I underwent a transition where I was initiated to become a Sangoma, a traditional healer. And I started making work about how people kind of related to me and how my relationship to people changed, because I was focused on the traditional aspects of how we commune as the indigenous people of sub-Saharan Africa. And so I began performances. I began performances where I kind of explored my own lineage in relation to culture, tradition, sex, the culture, religion, sex, and tradition, gender, race, and history. And all of these were important in how I was going to make work. I generally do not let the work dictates to me what it wants to become. So I just try and think, okay, this is going to become this is a performance, and then from that point onwards, the work kind of builds from that point on, and that's kind of the departure point of my work. I focus on an aspect from how the Black body, the Black female body specifically, lives in a land, and how the Black body has been colonized itself, and how colonization happens through the body, by entering the body. And basically that's what my work is about.
Thank you very much, Buhle. I know your work is about so much, and you've given us this headache of 3 minutes. I think to all our attendees, you can always Google Buhlebezwe and Nengi, and you will find lots of materials, videos, articles, and their web pages as well, to just get more familiar with your practice. So to start this conversation, because the whole essence of this conversation is about stories. And as artists, we are all telling stories in different ways, using different media. But what I want to ask both of you, and this is a question that's directed to both of you, and I'm going to start with Buhle, is what kinds of stories are you telling right now, like at this moment?
I like to think that I'm telling stories that we're afraid to talk about as people. And when I say we, I mean Africans owning their own stories, owning their own narrative. I know that that's the case in South Africa. And so historically, I wanted to change that narrative and make people aware of other stories that exist. Most of the time is the real story. It's the story behind the lie or behind the myth. But sometimes it's also, I try and make connections. But I think what's most important is we need to remember that before 1653, we had our own stories. And then during the time after 1653, we still had our own stories, but our stories weren't told. So not everybody's story has been told. And every story is part of the fabric of who we are right now. And I think they're all important. So I try and make sure that we remember, because we're too quick to forget. Yeah.
I like that relationship between remembering and forgetting. I'm going to come to that. Nengi, can you chip in?
Yeah, I think, well, quite similar things. I think with the fabric, with my engagement with the fabric, I'm trying to look at, well, the stories that have been forgotten, this history of weaving that's sort of dying out, this history of making fabric that comes from silk moths that's woven with industrial cotton, all produced in Nigeria, and that has gone out of production. But luckily, there are some designers that are starting to sort of revive this tradition of weaving and producing in Nigeria. So with the fabric, I think I'm looking in a way at that ancient history, but with the content of the painting, it's pretty much, I'm looking at contemporary Nigeria, what I see happening around me, and sort of trying to absorb the pulse of where I live, in Lagos, and engaging with other parts of Nigeria through archival images to tell the stories, because usually the stories that we see on in the media is the same story about the continent, just poverty, mass poverty, or we see, for example, when during the Black Lives Matter, somebody wrote an article about my work and said that I was painting about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I had to step in and correct that and say that, yes, I understand that the Black Lives Matter movement is important and, you know, I support it, but I am actually painting from my center, which is Lagos. And I'm painting about Black experiences in my country. And that's what the paintings were about. So I guess it's realizing that there isn't a center of the world, that there are multiple places, multiple stories, and I'm trying to sort of speak about Nigerian experiences through the paintings.
Very interesting, Nengi. Earlier on, you spoke about moving to Nigeria, and now you're speaking about absorbing. So for me, like, I'm just kind of very curious, like, how did moving to Nigeria change your artistic story itself? And also, like, what kind of impact does that have on your practice? Could you just talk about that briefly?
Well, I think honestly, like, because I did, the BA was 4 years at the slave, then the MA 2 years, and I had no break in between, and I was hardly visiting home as much. But when I came to Nigeria, for the first year back, I didn't even paint because it felt like I was looking at the society with fresh eyes, and I was seeing so many things almost like an outsider. So thinking about what I was looking at, and the first thing I noticed, which I mentioned a little earlier, was the fabric. And that for me was the key that sort of like turned my practice on its head. So since I moved to Nigeria, I've been trying to figure out, in sort of like an organic way and not allowing it to be forced, how I wanted to engage with fabric and tell stories that come from Nigeria, come from Lagos, come from Port Harcourt, because Nigeria is so big and so diverse as well. So you can't tell a whole Nigerian story. You have to sort of like focus on where you are and engage with that in that way. So for example, I'm not Yoruba, so it's taking a lot of learning for me to learn about Ashoki and about Sonyo and about where it comes from. So I think moving to Nigeria was just pivotal for me in my practice, because it gave me a degree of pride as well in making, pride knowing that I come from this vast tradition and history. It's not just the Benin bronzes, it's not just the Nok terracotta. There's this huge history of weaving that comes from West Africa, and I think all over Africa, there's some kind of engagement with textile. But I can't speak for everywhere, but I'm trying to learn as I go along.
Thanks so much, Nengi. I really love your work, and I've really been. It's something that I find really fascinating about your portrait, and it's this lack of anatomical detail in the faces as well. So I'm kind of like wondering, like, what's the story there? You know.
Well, thank you. I love your work too. And well, I guess with the faces and the lack of, you know, sort of like individuality in a way, with the thing with the bodies and the lack of individuality in the bodies, I guess, comes from, well, when I was in England, I was thinking a lot about race and about identity. I remember there was once I was on a train with, and a white South African woman came up to me and sat next to me and said, this is the first time that she'd ever spoken to a colored person, and she lived in South Africa. And I remember that was just such a weird thing, and also such a weird thing to just say to a random person. And And so I guess I was thinking a lot about my body in a sort of very wide space, and I was thinking about that and just expressing that in paintings. But when I came to Nigeria, well, everybody pretty much, you don't really have these, you're not really thinking about race and identity in that kind of way. So my practice shifted a bit, and it sort of started for me when I started noticing lots of mentally ill people walking on the streets in Nigeria, and realizing that we don't have a system for caring for people that struggle in this kind of way. And that is where really my engagement with thinking about a mental space or a state of mind started. So with the paintings, I'm not trying to paint portraits of people or individuals. I'm trying to think about the state of the individual, like the mental state of the individual or the mental state of the collective. For example, there's a painting that I made, it's called Gathering, which was sort of the title piece for my last show. And it was about a building that collapsed in Oniko in 2019. And I was looking at at images of people sort of rescuing and doing things that the government couldn't do. And I was so I guess for me, the paintings come from a point of empathy. I try and embody what the figures or the setters are feeling and translate that into painting. That's why I efface the details of the faces. And I just want the viewers to focus on the emotions of the moment.
Yeah, Nengi, thank you for that. You sort of you spoke earlier about this Sonia, for example, as a fabric, and I know there's we have a long history of artists using textile and materials and kind of stuff, and for me, I'm just kind of really curious to know how on one hand, what sort of influenced your visual storytelling using that material, for example? Is it more of the visual language from the art historical discourse, or basically more of family looking into things in the River State? I'm just kind of curious, what's the story there in terms of how you've approached that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because I guess when studying art and art history in school, I came across Yinka Shonibari's work, and I got to meet him as well. And he came into the school, and he's had this whole conversation within his practice about how Ankara isn't actually an African fabric, even though a lot of people associate it with being an African fabric. And I thought that degree of research and investigation was just absolutely fascinating. There are lots of artists that I'm inspired by, but in terms of like my engagement with textile, Yinka Shonibari, I think for me, was a starting point in the way in which he investigates his material. So moving back to Nigeria and knowing that I wanted to engage with textile in this kind of way, well, I didn't really know from the beginning how I would do it. But what I did know is I was still importing canvas from England to Nigeria because I couldn't find good canvas in Nigeria. Well, I didn't know where to, so I kept importing, and then I kept thinking that this is the most ridiculous thing. You can't tell me that there is no locally produced textile here, and so that's when I started sourcing for material that was made locally, and yeah.
One of the talking point of our conversation is the danger of a single story, and you there's a danger from the Nigerian perspective of what Nigeria is, and the danger of that single story is called Wazobia, which is the Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba, and now with that we sort of like simplified a very complex and nuanced understanding of what Nigeria is. And you don't sort of fit into any of these three equations, even though there's a danger that you could be assigned one of them. So for you, what does it mean to navigate, to be outside of this single story, so to speak, and also you getting to understand your cultural, your identity from that, going to River State? So I will leave you to explain that, how you've been navigating that.
Yes, a lot of people, for example, assume that I'm Igbo, and a lot of people that see me working with Sonia assume I'm Yoruba. But I think my approach to making and engaging with anywhere that I am, whether when I was in Port Harcourt, I was engaging with Nama TV. The Igbos call it Isiago, but in River State we call it Namatiki. That's the head of lions or head of animals. That's it. You find in the fabrics. And if I go to Lagos, I will engage with Ashoke. If I move somewhere else, I will engage with a different kind of material, because it's not really important to me to be sort of like very fixed. I see myself quite nomadic, and I just want to absorb different cultures, different experiences, and speak about them through the work.
Bukley spoke about meaning, and when you look at your painting, I've been into your studio and I've seen your work in person, and you sort of get this. Sort of like the way I say it, like your paintings have these spiritual experiences with the way you see them, and for me, it's like when someone sees them, you sort of like create a space for them to have multiple experiences about them, as again saying this is what my work is about. And for me, it's like I'm curious, like, is that really deliberate, or what kind of like informs that?
Yeah, I guess it boils down to the thing I said earlier, in the sense that whenever I am making work, my primary position is one of empathy. So I engage with either my setter or the situation in this kind of way, and try and translate that into the painting, so that and in a way I think the reason why I'm effacing the individuality is so that people from anywhere really can come meet the painting and be able to engage with emotions that I'm trying to discuss. There's some degree that I want the paintings to be inclusive. For example, there was a painting I made of a friend who was very sad on a particular day, and a random person from across the world sent me a message saying, "Oh, this is how I feel today." And I didn't have to use text or say this is about sadness, no, but I'm glad that in a way that they were able to feel the emotions that I was trying to translate into the painting. So I guess if it expands into, I've gotten this a lot, if it expands into it being a kind of spiritual experience for the viewer, that's an added thing for me, because I think I approach the act of painting in a very a spiritual way. I think there's a whole ritual, not in a strange way, but like there's a whole you know how it is when you're an artist. You get into the zone, you have to be centered, and you have to sort of like and really feel to produce. Well, different people produce in different kinds of ways, but that's how I approach it for me.
Bukley, are you is your connection good? Can you hear us?
I can hear you guys. I can hear you guys.
Okay, perfect. And then also talking about your practice, for example, you sort of like, to me, it seems like you have a very comprehensive understanding of loss, and you have used the words in one of your interviews where you spoke about the loss of religion, land, and dignity, and how have you, in what way have you used your art process and your work to sort of like change this story, like this story of loss that you've often emphasized?
Okay, so my idea of loss, basically, my understanding of loss is not like I think everybody else's. Number one, because I don't believe people, when we lose someone, we lose them forever. I believe that their spirit is basically visits us. It's still around us. It still exists. So it's not like, they have passed and that's it. So things don't disappear, people don't disappear, they are still around, their spirit is still there, it's imminent. So my theory isn't, my understanding on loss is based on that, number one, and I make work with that constantly in mind, that the spirits are constantly there. They speak to, they are also making the work. The many people who make up my DNA and my makeup are also making the work that I am making. So that's kind of how I look at it. Not all my works speak of loss. Maybe it's it's kind of there without me being intentional about it. I try not to, loss can be very jarring for some people and it can be very dark. So I don't want to be like, oh my God, everybody's, I'm just making work about all these dead people. But I think that it's important to remember how we lost certain things and how these things happened with people, but these people are no longer here. We're the only ones who can fix situations which haven't been created by us. So I'm kind of, when I speak about history, history's sad. It breaks your heart. So to kind of avoid it and to avoid the fact that we've lost so much of ourselves, would be, I think it would be disrespectful. And I also think that besides being disingenuous, it would also be irresponsible. As an artist, I can't speak about my people, the land that I live on, and not speak about the things we lost. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. The whole essence of spirituality is, in some ways, is to grapple with the sense of healing loss and retrieving, so to speak. So for someone who is a spiritualist, you've been initiated and all that, and so in that world you're initiated, and in the world of art you're also initiated as well. How do those two worlds sort of like merge in how you approach your practice? For example, in when you have element of being a sangoma, for example, with you performing in a space, how does it work for you, like the spiritual and the visual, so to speak?
Right. I think that generally the visual is spiritual. How can it not be spiritual? This is our personal seance. This is our love letter to our ancestors. This is our love letter to ourselves. This is love letters to future generations. This is the thing that we are doing. Nengi is like which predates colonial, ancient, the and used, and it's important we dig, because art is what we're doing. We've been sent here in order to, we're digging in creative ways. We're going back into ourselves. We're digging into ourselves in different ways, in ways which our people haven't been able to negotiate for a very long time, because they've had to worry about feeding themselves for longer. And for me, that's very, very important. I cannot separate myself from being a sangoma and an artist. I'm one and the same. I'm both, because I make work about my process, and my people are my process. But my spirituality are part and parcel of who my people are and who I am. So I cannot separate the two.
Buhlebezwe, thanks a lot for that. In the spirit of talking about loss, forgetting, remembering, I'm just curious, Nengi, as someone who has been able to navigate different worlds, whether it's from the Nigerian, British context, or whether it's from the Lagos, Rivers context. Sometimes when we make work, we have to forget certain things for us to be able to have certain things, on the canvas. So for you, what are the things that you are to forget, and for certain things to be remembered, so to speak, or do you even have that, that kind of dichotomy, so to speak, when you make work?
Yeah, no, I think I think with making, or moving from one place to the next, it's not an active, I don't have, well, I don't know if it's luckily or not, but I don't have to actively forget anything, because I feel all of my experiences are valuable and sometimes show up in the paintings, even the ones that are traumatic. So in fact, so I embrace them, embrace feelings like he was saying, and feelings of loss. If you're trying to speak about that through painting, it's important to embody all of those emotions and then begin and embrace whatever comes with that, however difficult. And past trauma that you're trying to relive or speak about through painting, it's important to embrace that as well and leave it on the canvas. So I don't actively engage in forgetting, but I guess that's just me.
Yeah, and yeah, we've all. I see it from a point of having to. It's a continuum where you're constantly navigating,
building. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think we're gonna leave the floor to our audience. If anyone has questions directed to anyone in particular, please you can put that. So yes, so there's a question here. This is for Nengi. It says, do you consider collaborating with the weavers of the Sanya fabric? And in doing so, do you think this would in any way extend the narratives you seek to express through your work?
It's a very important question. So I'll just say a little bit about Sonya. So Sonya actually is part silk and part cotton. And the silk was harvested in the north. It comes from moths, moth cocoons. So the moth will produce this cocoon, the thread will be spun and it was then transported to the south and western Nigeria and used by weavers locally to make sonya in combination with industrial cotton. So the thing is, the art of extracting silk from moss has died out completely. So it does not exist. And I've tried to paint on contemporary ashoke, but because sonya is never washed, before I paint on it, I would have to put it through like extreme like treatment to make sure that there's nothing that interacts in a negative way with the oil painting. So soya is the only fabric that has been able to stand that test of putting it through extreme heat to kill bacteria or whatever before I begin the painting. Every other fabric, every other version of ashoke that I've tried, no matter how ancient, has buckled or unraveled under those temperatures. So this is the thing. This is the reason why I'm still working with soya. Soya is no longer produced in its real sense. It's no longer produced. But I am looking forward to a time where I find a version that of weaving or a thread or a material that I find is resilient enough to interact with oil paint, because oil paint is also quite acidic. If the surface isn't prepared properly, it can burn holes into the fabric with time. So so that's the reason why I'm still looking for the vintage materials and engaging with those in that kind of way.
Oh, thanks for that. I didn't know about sonya as a fabric because I know about ashoke, but yeah, thanks a lot for speaking about that. And someone wrote in the chats. This is Summer Crosby. She was talking about how I believe that too, that people are never really gone. Thank you, Buhlebezwe, for your words on the topic of loss and your respect for it as it relates to your people and land. And Buhle, are you there, Buhle?
I'm here.
Oh yes, thanks for staying with us. In some of the performances, you've used like materials like soap, for example, where this is how I interpret it, this idea of sort of like cleansing and in a way, and I've seen performances where you sort of like peeling things away from your body. which in a way I also interpret as cleansing, but they come with different action. One, you're peeling out, and the other, you're sort of like kind of like rubbing in itself. I don't know if my interpretation is correct, but what does that mean to you, this idea of cleansing in itself, and then how it relates to your performances and how your works are being made?
You see, that's the thing I love about interpretation, because it's for you. The artwork no longer belongs to me. It's for you to relate to. The interpretation belongs to you now and how you see it. The meaning for me might be very simplistic, but we all have our own traumas. We have our own things that we understand as something else. The way that I always kind of see the Black female body specifically, because I'm talking about my point of view, right? And the point of view of the Black female body is the way in which I have many problems with the ramifications of how we treat young Black children and young Black women, and how we think that they need to be purified all the time. And the idea of taking away and putting on is something that I'm constantly trying to do with this idea of cleansing, because that's what cleansing basically is when it comes to the Black female body. It's either stripping or clothing, stripping or covering. And that for me is something, and it's also done with other bodies. So other bodies clothe you, other bodies strip you. And so that's what I always try and relate, no matter what movement it is, even if it's stillness, people can strip you with their eyes or they can clothe you with their eyes. It depends on the choices that they make. And that's why I say your interpretation is interesting. And that's the thing. Interpretations have their own ramifications. And I like that. And this is the idea that I try and play with as well.
Thanks for that. I'm also going to get back to you about certain readings and I have from some of your performances. There's another question here it's directed to Nengi from Info Arms. I hope that's been pronounced correctly. So it says, interesting what you said about Sonia. What role does ephemerality and absence play in your work? And then how would you deal with your work, so to speak, in quote, disappearing with time as the fabrics have?
Yeah, I think, sorry, I was just taking notes. Ephemerality and absence, that's a huge part of my practice. There's a painting that we showed that was in the slides from before. The title was What Was Lost. And I guess I was processing that 2019, 2020, and again, loss and the sudden disappearance of people, disappearance of community, the ability to be together and communicate and just be close to each other. So that is how I think I deal with absences in my paintings. They're almost like ghost-like presences in some of the works. But in terms of the fabric and the material, the beautiful thing about Sonia is, even though it's no longer made, it hasn't disappeared. It's still very present in people's trunk boxes or in museums. Some of them are in museums, and sometimes people bring them out for special occasions and still wear Sonia. So Sonia hasn't disappeared. It's part of our material culture, our history. It's this heritage fabric that is part of who we are, and it's part of our identity. And as a painter, it's probably very narcissistic. We're trained to ensure that our paintings outlive us. So I don't think, unless people decide to burn my paintings, I don't think that they'll be disappearing anytime soon.
Yeah, it's also when you think about disappearance from a broader spectrum, and how sometimes things, and also vis-a-vis trends, things sort of like disappear and then they reappear as well. I think maybe that's also another way I see disappearance, not from the point of being permanence, but from the point of temporality.
And relevance. I think things drop in relevance. I think even, like you said, with trends, there's something happening with we talked about this in passing before.
Yeah.
There's a trend at the moment. A lot of people are looking at Black artists, and it's thinking about that wave and that cycle of relevance and of importance that we have to deal with as artists, I think.
I think speaking about trend, so the next question I have, this is for both Buhlebezwe and Nengi, also speaks to this idea of trend. So this is from Morris, where he says, thank you both of you for your interventions. There is a huge trend of Black bodies in many works, especially waiting on the continent. How do you think the narratives around Black bodies can be changed if we work with absence of it, like you do in both of your practice? I think I'm going to let Buhle give her thoughts on this question. Buhle, what do you think? And before I pass it on to Nengi.
First of all, we need to be clear about what is a Black body, because not everybody identifies as a Black body, right? So I just think it's important to be clear about what is a Black body. I'm assuming you mean the indigenous people of the African continent, and therefore I'm going to take it forward with that. I mean, haven't we been absent enough? That's my answer. Have we not been absent enough? I don't want to be absent anymore. I want to be here. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. I think, it's bigger than a trend. We are tired of being unseen. I'm tired of being invisibilized. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to take up space. But I get your point. There is a romanticization of, of the Black body now, but that's an old thing which goes back to fetishization and the fetish of the Black body. Then we need to be careful as people not to continue to fetishize ourselves or to auto-exoticize ourselves. And that's what we need to start grappling with, because we've been exoticized and we've been fetishes for so long that now we need to speak for ourselves in ways in which are comfortable for us, but make the person who did that uncomfortable, if that makes sense. So it's in a way returning the gaze, I suppose. And I really, in all the work that I do, I want you to look and I want you to remember and I want to return the gaze. I would like people to feel uncomfortable if there's even like an inkling of them wanting to, having shown up thinking that they can exoticize or fetishize, or that they're going to see an Africa show, or they're going to see an Africa artist. I really want you to rethink that stereotype and that narrative. So I'm here to take up that space.
Thank you for that. I like what you said about returning the gaze, and in a way it can work on the two channels. The gaze has been thrown at you and then you send it back. But Nengi, what do you think about that question?
I completely agree with what B said about exoticization, and one aspect I really would like to comment on, I think it's not one that's spoken about very often, is the market dynamics of this, that's feeding this frenzy of sort of like exotic Black bodies represented in art, in paintings, and I don't know if it's some sort of like it's trying to rebalance some sort of like guilt of not having enough diversity in collections, or I'm not really sure what it is. But I will speak as an artist that I hope that painters all over do not feel that they need to lean into the market dynamics. We cannot be controlled by what is popular, what is trending, what is selling for $1 million at auction. And we need to continue to find ways to continue to be honest about our expression and the way in which we speak about ourselves, and have authority of that conversation and not allow the market dictate how we should make. That's my perspective.
And since we are in the market, so to speak, talking at an art fair, so those in the market are listening to you, Nengi. There's a question that for both of you, and I think I'll get Bukley's thoughts on this first. It says, this is from Info Arms, it says, what are your thoughts regarding the presence of Black bodies in art and familiarity? Do you think a point will be reached when these bodies become so familiar that they are no longer seen? I think I'm curious to get your response to that, Bukley.
I kind of think I answered that with what I said before, but like I said, we haven't been seen for how many years? Like it's more than 1,000 years we haven't been seen. We've been seen as in the Renaissance paintings as maids, as people to be dressed in, as servants, as I'm like what. I think that there's a type of Black body, like Nengi said, in order to feed this frenzy that's being kind of created. There's an archetype that will be tiring. It's already tiring now, but it's tiring for some of us. It's not tiring for other people. Perhaps the people who buy these works are the type of people I don't think will allow them to depreciate in value. So they will make sure that they are still unfamiliar in a sense, to put it nicely. And so that the market is still kind of hungry for them. So I'm kind of very aware. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be more discourse on the types of Black bodies that are being seen in particular ways, in how we see these Black bodies. And I guess your question about how Black bodies trend feeds into the danger of a single story. Of course, I mean, like I said, the over-exoticized, the auto-exoticization of it is a hindrance. We need to be very clear about how we tell our stories, otherwise we feed the beast. And the beast is the single story. The beast is this poverty porn. It's this, where we, oh my God, your skin is so dark, it's so beautiful. That Africa is like this. It's oh, you're from South Africa, so safari is just like a normal thing for you. No. So these are things that we need to basically be very clear. This is the story that I'm telling. And if the collector, institution, etc., comes up to you and they're like, oh, wow, you're from Africa, I've seen your work, blah, 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 blah. You're like, yes, I am. And if they get something wrong, you clear it up immediately. We need to be very clear about the type of content that we're sending out. But I don't think I need that talk. I think a lot of other artists need to listen to that. We all need to sit down. We need a family meeting as African artists.
We need to find a village square for that somewhere. I think I'm going to let Nengi speak. But for me, just the way I see it is Black bodies, white canvas. And it's kind of very interesting on how this goes. This Black bodies on Black canvas, how they also see it on white walls, so to speak. But Nengi, what do you think about that?
I think we have said it very, very perfectly. And I think what we're doing ourselves a very big disservice when there becomes an oversimplification of the Black experience. And that is what we keep churning out and churning out and churning out in paintings. It's quite it can sometimes be quite one-dimensional. And I think that it's important that there is still research. We come from so much richness and so much culture and so much history. I think it's important that as artists, we continue to engage in this kind of way and not choose the easy route. I'm speaking in parables, but those that need to
talking about parables. There's one that's a quote from The late Chinua Achebe says, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And oftentimes as artists, we are constantly told or admonished to tell our own stories. But the question I ask, a lot of the time, and probably this is for our audience and those in the art fair, is how can we tell our stories? With whose money are we going to do that? And maybe that's a question that the collectors who are listening can reflect on. I'm being told our time is almost up, and then we have to, as Africans, we always keep to time. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me, Buhlebezwe and Nengi. I really appreciate you taking the time. Buhle, I understand, the internet always, the gods of the internet always come in, so it's really, really understandable. But it was really great to hear you speak.
I'm so sorry, the mountains are not being friendly today.
Yeah,
no, but it was such a pleasure to hear you speak, though. Yeah.
And I would want to ask, do you guys have any last word you want to say to our audience and those who have joined us? Buhle, you have any last words you want to say?
No, I think it has been said.
Nengi, do you have any last word?
No, I agree. It has all been said.
It has been said. Thank you so much, both of you. Thanks so much to the ArtX team, to Aud, for inviting us, to Maurice and to Okwe, to everyone. And please, like I said earlier, Google is really friendly to us. So just type the name Buhlebezwe Siwani, and type the name Nengi Omuku. There's a lot of materials there about their practice, and you can also see a lot of multiple stories that they tell with their works. And thanks once again for joining us. My name is Ayọ, and it's been nice to share this space with everyone. And thank you, and have a beautiful evening from Lagos. Bye, everyone.